our guest tonight, I promised him it'll be a relatively informal evening. I'm going to be asking him some questions, and we can all he'll field questions from all of us. But it's just to set this up. This is our guest in 1934 in Zurich, Switzerland, with Baba.
Still the same haircut. There you go.
And how old were you? 2 years old. 2 years old, and so tonight he's going to spend the next few hours telling us his impressions of that visit with Bob. No. Having been only 2 years old, obviously, I'm sure he may not have a lot of recollections from that visit. Fortunately for us, he did meet Baba again in 1952, and so I'm sure we'll be hearing some impressions of that. But we're going to be talking a little about how Baba altered his life and also the life of his family, because his parents were also very devout Baba lovers and spent many years with Baba in India. So please welcome Toby Mertens, who's come all the way from Central Mexico. We're going to put you in the hot spot that Will David hates this seat. He feels that this makes you look like a Catholic bishop or something when you sit up here.
No, like the Pope.
You know, I was just thinking that I couldn't help but reflect on the fact that Baba looks there. He's the father and the mother, right? Mm-hmm. Baba, and this Baba says, I am both your father and your mother. We just came, as he's standing.
Thank you.
Can you just say good evening so I can get a reading on this?
Good evening.
Is that all right? Up a little bit? Okay. Toby, your parents were, of course, Hedi and Walter Mertens. Your father, I guess, met MeherBaba in 1933. Do you want to give us a little bit of background on your parents before we get into your story, or how would you like to approach this?
I can try talking about my parents. They basically were very aware people for their time, and in 1930 there was a whole awareness movement going on in the 30s in Switzerland, especially in Zurich, and they were part of that. There was the psychiatrist Jung, and all kinds of awareness things were going on, and they were a part of that. I do not know how they met Baba or how they got to hear about him. I do not know that.
Well, I just thought, just to sort of set one brief stage here, I would read. This was from an account by Roano Bogoslav of MeherBaba's trip in 1934, and he was talking about when Baba arrived at your home, because Baba in 1934 spent 10 days at the Mertens home in Zurich. And when Baba first arrived there, I guess your family, of course you were 2 years old, so you probably wouldn't recall, but although, do you have any recollection of when Baba arrived?
I have very clear recollection of all that stuff. I have much better recollection of that time than I have when I met him when I was 18.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Well, why is that, do you suppose?
I do not know. What really happened at the time, I was told we were going to have guests and so on, so forth. And then one morning my life had changed. The people had arrived the evening before while I was asleep, and they arrived in my house. And I was a stepchild from that moment on. Baba got all the attention. It was, I had a very hard time with that, and everything was focused on Baba, and there were a lot of people there, and strange looking people, unusually looking people. So I had to get used to that. And just my entire life changed from one day to the other. I could not run around anymore. We were living in a real big house. It was 15 rooms, not including bathrooms and utility rooms, just 15 living rooms or bedrooms.
I know that your father met Baba and his party at the train station with 3 cars and a truck to carry the luggage. And I was wondering, what did your father do for a living? Because obviously he was quite well-to-do.
My father was a landscape architect, and in those days he designed and installed gardens, and he did mostly big stuff. He did all the parks in Zurich along the lake. He did castles, he did that sort of stuff.
Now, do you remember the moment when Baba walked into the house? Because this was apparently, as you say, everyone arrived. People were booked into all the hotels in Zurich. There was, I guess your house was full of people, but there were also many people in the hotels who came from all over Europe to be with Baba there.
Yes, it was basically, my life turned into a zoo from one day to another. And it was not my house anymore, and I had to be quiet, and I was not to be seen and not to be heard. And this was really very hard on me. And I know that, if being with Baba is not love or pleasure, you have to earn it. There is a price to be paid, in one way or another. And anyway, I got to pay my price real early. And I remember I was very jealous at one time. Baba had his room at the end of the hall, and he was there. And one day, I saw my mother going down that hallway, and I just stood right in the middle, in front of her, and stopped her. And she looked at me like, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want love too." And she says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "What do you have arms for?" So I got a hug, got put down, and she was going, and that was kind of basically what happened there. And then I also, one time, though my life had changed from one day to another, and I did not know what it was all about. So I don't know, was it jealousy, whatever, but I was really upset, and I went down this hallway and I just burst into Baba's room. Wow. And Baba seemed to be walking or standing there. He turned around, and all the people that have children, they know when they are upset and they come in the house. I mean, there are vibrations like a freight train coming, right? So it is what I did, and Baba looked at me, made one step to the side, held out his hands, grabbed my hands, and he swung me around a couple of times and put me down, and I was over it. That was the end of that. And I walked out again. And then I remember another time that he was out in the garden, and he had the ladies surrounding him. He was sitting in a chair, and he had his blackboard and was doing his thing, and somebody was translating his sign language. and we had gravel walks. So I came down the gravel walk, and anybody that walks on gravel is being heard. And I remember clearly that all the ladies turned around, and I ran into a wall of vibrations from them, like, not now. And so I stopped, assessed the situation, and I walked right through them, through the whole circle of the ladies that did not want me there. And Baba picked me up. He put me on his knees, and he kept on doing his thing. And, I just sat there, and all of a sudden, basically what I felt is my heaviness that I had disappeared from me, and I got to be light, and everything got to be okay. I was okay, and then everything was just fine, and the world was okay. And then this kind of past, not willing to intellectualize about. I just want to keep that experience as it is and leave it at that. And I also, to this day, every once in a while, I can get into that space. I cannot get into it when I really need to, when I'm really upset. It doesn't really work then. But I can recreate it and recreate the feeling of it. And so there were a lot of other things. Life was real tough for me while he was there, and at one time, no, I was not to be seen or heard or whatever.
Did you have a nanny taking care of you? Or?
We had a maid, and she took care of me. She really was my mother. My mother, by that I mean the lady that picked me up, that hugged me, that took care of me. My mother was being a lady and being with Baba, and I just did not get much attention from her at that time.
I should also point out that there was a lot of intense things going on during Baba's stay in Zurich. Was not only did he go to Fallenfluh, where he was in seclusion there, which was very interesting because your parents drove him up there, and your father actually took a 2-hour watch while Baba was in seclusion, and no one could get within 100 yards of Baba. If they had gotten within 50 yards of him, they would have died, Baba said, because such was the intensity of the spiritual work he was doing. He was apparently meeting with his agents. And there was a rainstorm while they were there. Baba was in this spot where everyone knew it had to be rainy, and they built a fire for him so that when he came out of his seclusion at the end of the day, he could get dry by it. And despite the fact that it had rained very hard, Baba was completely dry. And he'd actually gone out in the Western clothes that they had for him and had changed into his sadra and wrapped himself in 2 sheets when he was in seclusion there. So that was a fairly intense day. And there was also Gabriel Pascal, Karl Vollmuller, and several other people converged on the Mertens home to talk to Baba about his film project and their plans to make a motion picture based on Baba's spiritual theme. And so, according to the diary kept by Rowano Bogoslav, just about every day there was some intense conversations and discussions going on about this film project. So it wasn't simply, Baba wasn't just there resting and taking it easy there. There was an awful lot of work going on while he was at your home.
Yes, he was a lot in demand, and I know that my father tried to get Professor Jung, to meet Baba, but Jung declined. He just did not want to touch it. And my parents were very upset about that. Very upset.
There were also, you said there were a lot of unusual looking people there, and I assume one of the reasons is because it seems like there were an awful lot of artists who came to see Baba. There were a lot of kind of avant-garde Europeans, also a lot of aristocrats. It was quite an interesting group that was there.
The unusual people that I'm referring to are the people from India. They wore, different colors. This is what I was referring to earlier. I was used to all other people.
Right. I just wanted to read one thing that Ruano wrote about your home, which I thought might give us an insight into the way that you were living there. She says how nicely and neatly they had arranged things for Baba. This is referring to Toby's parents, and also for the whole of the party accompanying him, 10, including males and females, I guess were with Baba. Cleanliness and decency seemed to be the motto of the house. Even the floors were so clean and shining and smooth that it required special attention to take every step with the utmost care, and very lightly, lest a foot slip, giving no time for proper balance and recovery before one fell flat. Do you remember your floors being that shiny and slippery?
I know the house was always immaculately clean, and
How old was Toby? How old were you?
2.
Well, how could he remember?
Well, he remembers quite a bit.
No, we lived there afterwards, so...
Oh, what did the house smell like?
Like my house. I do not know. It didn't smell of pine sol or something like that.
Did you have any other recollections of that particular visit with Baba?
Yes. At one time when I was not to be seen or heard, all of a sudden a big search party was out for me. And so my brother and I were herded into a room where Baba was, and Baba wanted to play with us. And he wanted to play marbles, and I didn't want to play. No, it just was not convenient for me to play at the time. No way.
How old was your brother?
He's a year and a half older.
So did he play?
No. No, we just plain striked.
What was Baba's reaction?
I don't think he had any problems with that at all. No, he tried to play with us, and I think one of the difficult things was that he did not speak. So, my mother was there and said, "No, play. And no. And we just refused to do that. And so we were herded out of there again, and that was the basically what that session was all about.
Did his silence make any impression on you as a child? Were you aware that he was silent?
Yes, yes. I was told about that, and I had no problems with that. This kind of sort of thing that he did on his blackboard astonished me, but then it didn't bother me whatsoever.
What about you? Did your brother have any impressions that were different than yours of that visit? Did you ever speak to your brother about that visit?
Yes. I talked to him a couple of years ago. He came to visit, and so I talked to him about that, other things of that time, and he has blocked out the entire thing. He has, I think to the age of 12 or 13, he says he has absolutely no memory of anything.
Is he interested in Baba now?
No.
Now, I wonder if one of the reasons that it could have been blocked out is that, was it difficult for you because your mother, I believe your mother went to live with Baba in India. According to an article that was in The Awakener, in the summer of 1938, which is when I guess you were 6 years old then, Hedi Mertens was deathly ill and wanted to either die or be cured with Baba. Baba allowed her to come to India together with Helen Dam and Irene Bilo. A grandmother took care of Hedi's 4 children and husband. In India, her health very much improved under Baba's loving care, but she had to stay for many months and only returned shortly before the beginning of World War II. Do you recall when she went to India to be with Baba, and was that
yes.
difficult? Or?
I basically, it was not really difficult. My grandmother was really great with kids, and she took real good care of us, and the rest of the household was there. I remember us getting postcards and letters that you write to kids. She was always talking about monkeys and the amount of monkeys that are there. Before she came back, she asked what she could get us, as a present, and we wanted a monkey. And I was very disappointed. She did not come with a monkey. She gave us land hockey sticks, and they were field hockey, and they were too tall for us to really play with. And anyway, I was very disappointed for a long time.
Had you been aware of had you been aware of your mother's illness prior to her going to India?
Yes, my mother had problems with her stomach and ulcers and so on. And later, after she came back, and I was maybe 15, I was away in school, came back for vacation, and I arrived in the evening. My mother whipped out a meal for me, and then I went to bed. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and I heard noises out in the hallway, and I got up and I saw my mother on the carpet in the hallway, just like a worm, twisting and moaning and groaning, and one of her ulcers had broken through, and the entire stomach content went into her, whatever you call it, abdominal cavity or whatever, and she was just burning up. And she went to the hospital and had an operation and that sort of thing. They took half of the stomach out, and which was quite the thing to do in those days, in Switzerland, in the country. So, but she got really much better after that, and after that she could eat whatever she wanted, and she was in much better condition after all that had healed.
Now, in December of 1938, or November of 1938, your father went to India, I guess, and he and your mother stayed there for a while together, and then they both came back. Is it? Of course, you were over 6, so I don't know if you.
My father went, and I think my mother was gone like a year and a half or so, and my father maybe 3 months. He went later and came back earlier.
Now, at one point, your father apparently had been upset that he was really missing your mother very much, and he wrote a letter and made some sarcastic remarks in his letter about Baba's harem, and about your mother being part of Baba's harem. And your mother, according to this account, was upset by that, and she wrote a letter back defending herself and defending Baba. But Baba had to read every letter that went out from the ashram, and he wouldn't let her send that. He told her to go back and write another letter. So she wrote another letter, and in the second letter, she ignored his remarks, but she just described her daily life and threw in some details about her life there. And Baba again said, no, this is no good, write another letter. And in the third letter, she wrote how much she loved your father and how much she missed him and missed her children. And then Baba said, all right, this is the letter to send. I don't know if do you know that story?
No.
And I wasn't able to find it in the research I did, but I'd also heard some story about that your mother had been worried about your father and your children, and had gone to Baba and had said, maybe I should leave, and what should I do? And that Baba had said, I'm taking care of Walter and the children. You don't have to worry about them. Is another story that I heard. But your father, and I wondered if maybe you could just tell us a little bit about, your father and mother's personalities in a moment, because when I found this is from your father's diary that was in the Awakener a few years back, and his first entry, he arrived November 25th in Bombay, and I guess he first saw Baba on November 26th, the next day. And on November 26th, he says, on December 6th, he says, I've been in India for 10 days, and I must try with the help of my diary to describe the essential. But on November 26th, all he could write was Meherabad with 3 exclamation points, everything too overwhelming to be able to describe it just now. The next day he said, today also deep and crucial. I am still not able to write. Now I am happy and peaceful in the deepest knowledge. Everything will turn out well, ordered and blissful, and Baba is the most real reality, God-man like Christ. And throughout the entries in his diary, he describes taking trips with Baba to Happy Valley and various moments of his trip to India, and he just seems like he's in total bliss. And I was wondering, was he a man given to those kind of feelings, or if you could just take a moment and tell us a little of your impressions of your father's and mother's personalities.
No. The way I remember my father, he was a very strict man, very good-looking and very well-dressed man. Things had to be exactly his way at all times, and I remember, like at the table when we had guests, and maybe there were 12 people at the table, my brother and I would be sitting there, and I made maybe a spot or whenever my father caught my eye, and he did like that, I picked up my dish and I went out in the kitchen to to eat. And I didn't mind doing that at all, because there was our maid that I loved dearly, and that was okay with me. So
he at another point in the diary, which I can't find offhand, but he tells Baba something about how he wants to be. He considers himself a spiritual person, but he doesn't want to be spiritual in the Indian sense. He wants to be spiritual in a European sense, which I thought was interesting. That I'll see if I can find it later on. But he was basically saying he didn't want to pretend that he was not a European and a man of European culture. And Baba said that's fine. Baba said he says, I am for the East and the West, and you don't have to become an Eastern ascetic or a yogi in order to please me.
My father was a very powerful man, and he demanded respect at all time from everybody, and this is what my father, the way I remember him, and the role he had in my life.
Is this your father?
Yes.
I'll send this around. This is Baba with Walter Mertens here. And this is Baba just down in the bottom of this picture. You can't really see him because I'm sure that's you sitting on your mother's lap, but his head was cut off there. But this is his mother, and these are his cousins, I guess, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And these are some pictures that Hedi took in India, so I'll send that around. In another instance, Baba had your mother and father with him one day, and he told them that they had been with him always, and that he said, Hedi, Walter, and I are one, and you have been with me always, and there are great tasks for you to perform. So, at any rate, at that time, you were under the care of your grandmother in Switzerland. Are there any memories of Baba in those intervening years until you met him again that you
no,
would like to share?
not really. Life changed rather fast after my mother and father got back from India. World War II broke out. Business died completely. My father died, and we had to sell the house, and we moved into an apartment near the lake, and so things changed very rapidly, and my mother talked about Baba, but then we never got into it. And as far as I remember, we have never been Baba worshippers. By that I mean that we had rituals or anything like that going ever.
Did your mother continue to communicate with the people in Zurich who
Yes.
had met Baba at that
Yes.
time, and have Baba? Was there a Baba group or meetings or?
Irene Below, I remember her coming to the house every once in a while and a visit and telephone calls, and and then an artist named Leo Loipi, Helen Dahm, yes, Havliger, Max Havliger and his wife. I never liked Max Havliger. I have a hard time with him to this day. He is so fanatic. He does not have any space for anything except his own way. And his wife, she's absolutely beautiful.
Are they still alive?
I think so.
They were here
A few years ago.
Yeah, they were our guests.
And he was a different personality in America. I've visited with him a few times in Switzerland, and he had his own point of view. You could see that, whatever it was. And then over here, he had a whole different change. He felt like his heart was inflamed when he came here to the center. It was a whole different side of him, which I didn't see in Switzerland.
I came here to meet them. I was there this evening when they were here, and he's still, he is really a Prussian officer attitude, and he's a militarist. He is, I just have a hard time with him, and it's okay with, for him to be the way he is, I just want to stay away from him.
Baba said we should try to love everyone. He didn't say we had to like everyone, right?
It's okay with me for him to be the way he is.
So now, how did your mother deal with your father's death and the war and the hardships? Was she able to kind of rely on Baba in those times, or?
Yes, she did a lot of that, but like I told you, things changed very rapidly. When I was 3 years old, I knew what caviar was all about, and good caviar was all about. And then the war started. My father had to go into military service. He was gone often. There was rationing. We had rationing to the point where it was a third of an egg a person a month. and one stick of butter for 4 people, so on. There was nothing available. Same with textile, shoes, all that sort of thing. And I also remember I got to wear all the hand-me-downs for my brother, and that only really because there wasn't anything else, and I hated that. Hated my brother a long time for that. But how did she cope? Life was the same for everybody. So, I was never hungry, but I sure ate a lot of potatoes in those days, and then there was blackout for years.
Even in Switzerland?
Oh, yes.
Oh.
You had black curtains in the windows.
I was assuming Switzerland being neutral, that it wasn't...
Yeah.
All
there was radio. And maybe my brother and I could listen to the radio from 4 to 6, because after that the grown-ups were listening to the radio, and so we read a lot of books and did that sort of thing. And I remember getting sick. It meant staying in bed forever. Like, we had to stay in bed 3 days after the fever was down. But there was no penicillin, there was nothing. You just had to sweat it out. And it was the same for everybody. So it was just hard times where nothing happened.
I'd like to know when you felt your relationship with MeherBaba began as an adult, or had it been ongoing and you just kind of realized more about it? I'm curious.
I'm willing to answer that. I met Baba when I was 18, and to meet him, I was going to school in Geneva at the time, and my mother wanted me to show up. So I didn't really want to go, because it was an 8-hour trip, so on. And I went anyway. And I got there, and the Mandali were in a different house, and I was with them. I remember Gustaji, he was, I think...
He was silent too.
He didn't talk, but we laughed a lot. We had a hell of a good time together. He was a very small, slender man, and he just thought everything was funny, and that was really okay with me. And then I went to see Baba. Somebody came, and then I had to run, and you got 10 minutes. All that, so I was getting there.
Was Baba staying at your mother's home? Or?
Yes. She lived in Locarno, or Solduno to be precise, and he was there. So I got in there. He had somebody that would interpret for him, and it really bothered me, so Baba just sent him out. And so we spent about 3/4 of an hour together. Nothing much happened. He had his blackboard, and my English was really bad, so we did not really get far on an intellectual basis. But he was very warm, and there was no distance between us. This is really what I remember. And what I remember clearly, that people had gathered outside waiting for me to come out of there. And everybody came down on me, said, "What happened?" They said, "Nothing." And so, my mother later on gave me a private quiz about what had happened. And I said, hey, nothing happened. To get to your question, I heard that there was one, before I came over here, really before I went to Germany, I was maybe 23 or so, and at the time, I was into the life of a young man about town, and my mother tried to push Baba onto me, and at one time she really pushed a little bit too hard, and I asked her to leave me alone about that, and I do not want to play the violin anymore either, okay? And then I went to university in Munich for 3 years, worked 1 year in Zurich, and then I came over here and I stayed with Ivy Dews. In Woodside, she had a big estate, and I played gardener and handyman and babysitter and car washer, and we did not really get along all too well. I do not know why, but we did not get along too well, and however she admired me, how I was handling and taking care of Charmian's husband at the time. He was an ex-police officer. First time he showed me around the grounds. Now that is, I'd say, 6'2", 250 pounds. And he walks ahead. And what he does, he whips around. He said, "Don't you ever walk behind me." You know, I was in narcotics, and nobody walks behind me. I said, okay. But and he also wanted me to wash the car, like on Saturday at 5 o'clock. And I refused to do that, and things like that. I had all week to do it. And anyway, Mrs. Dews enjoyed our interaction. I really like Charmian. She's a really beautiful person, and I've always liked her.
Do you keep in touch with her now?
No. I met somebody from San Francisco, from the group up there, and I asked them about Charmian, and I was given some information and asked to leave her alone with those words. I said, just let her be. She has her situation to deal with and has to do with her child, and just let him be. So I did that to come back. I was here in Los Angeles, and trying to get started and start a new life. And I was working for a landscape architectural office, and somewhere along the line I took the EST training. Some people may be familiar with that. And that really opened up this whole thing for me, like what happened with Baba and so on. But then when Mrs. Havliger came the first time alone, that was a few years before. She was a traveling companion to a woman who lived in Ojai. She got in touch with me. I went to Ojai and picked her up and went to visit and drove her down to the meeting. And when somehow I was asked to talk about Baba, and that's when I started talking about Baba and my childhood experiences with him. And as I started talking, I didn't know what I wanted to say, but that is when it all came up, and I was just looking at a color movie and the whole thing, and I got to feel my anger and rejection and the love and the getting things together. It was one hell of an evening for me.
It just came out.
When was this?
10 years ago, something like that. Yes, or more.
You had a brother, and there were 2 other children in your family as well?
Yes, I have one full brother, and okay, this is complicated. I am out of the second marriage of my father and my mother. They both had 2 children before. So there were really 6 children. The 3 children of my father, I never had any contact with, and I grew up with my mother's children. And these are the children that seem to be in that book.
Oh, because I thought it said that those were your mother's nieces, your cousins.
Okay, yeah, that is a whole bunch of kids that are like 15 years older or 17, right. Something like that.
What I was going to ask though is have any of them remained consciously aware of Baba?
No.
Yes. These are Hedi's nieces, Martha and Ursula?
Yeah, that's Martha and Ursula.
I see.
I've been in contact with both of them. I really love Martha. She is
I'll send around the book with a picture of Baba.
Highly intelligent lady. Did the best master thesis or doctorate thesis that was ever written at the University of Zurich. And somewhere along the line she had, and when she was here visiting me some years ago, we talked about that, and in one of her sleepless nights, really, she wrote 20 pages of Baba, okay? And she is highly intellectual, and, she was told that Baba is God. And she, with her intellect, thinks, if you're God, show me a miracle, or why. She just could never get that together, and she really backed away from that. Her younger sister came to visit about a couple of years ago. I think she never got into Baba, and I think it was an experience that happened in her life, and she kept on going her way.
I wanted to ask one thing about your meeting when you were 18. Although, wasn't that in 1952? So you must have been either 19 or 20, I think. Yeah. At any rate, when you were with Baba, did any of that feeling of when you'd been on his lap and that peacefulness,
no.
That warmth, none of that came back?
No, I just remember somehow, like first time, my life turned into a zoo. There were so many people there, and this and that. Everything was happening, and it was not for me. There was none of that. I just know that I went back to the men's quarters after I had been with Baba, and I had a good time with Gustaci the rest of the afternoon. And then there was dinner, and it had been an 18-hour day before, and I needed to leave again. And it was, I just never got any time to dwell on it.
Have you been to India?
No.
Do you have any desire to go?
Okay. Yes and no. It is not on my priority list, not on the top at the moment.
Shall we open this up to
Yes,
other questions? Georgine had one. We'll
Okay.
go back to Christine.
Okay.
So, Toby, between when you were 23 and 10 years ago, Baba wasn't really part of your life?
Not consciously.
And when you were 2, and you said, and all these different kinds of people were coming, how did they find out to come? Was it just word of mouth through intellectual circles, or did they advertise, or how did they know who to come to see?
Like I told you, my parents were in these intellectual circles, and they were into all kinds of psychic phenomena, and you name it. And somehow they're out of this group. I think a lot of Irene Below came out of her father, was part of that group, I understand. And so Irene came into that, and I remember Quentin, good man. He brought us balloons and blew them up for us.
Quentin Todd.
Quentin Todd, yes. First time I had balloons in my life. If there are any questions, or what can I do? Okay.
I'd like to hear more about your life with Meher Baba from that point. And was it Ojai where you gave the talk and everything started to come back?
No, I picked up Mrs. Havliger
Right.
and brought her here, and she talked about Baba, and then I was asked to talk about Baba. It was right here. I didn't get to sit in this chair.
Since then,
Baba is just a part of my life. He flashes on my screen daily at one occasion or another, and what I really get to see is his eyes. And sometimes he has, he's really amused, shows amusement in his eyes about me or whatever, I do not know. There's always, the picture that I get of him daily is really of his eyes, his hair, and his mustache. And it happens right up here. And, I really see his eyes or communicate with his eyes or get the message from his eyes. I told that to my wife today, and she said, what does Baba say to you? And I didn't know how to answer that, because Baba doesn't talk to me.
Is she interested in Baba at all? Your wife, or?
No, she came to the Sahavas one time, and she talked to Phyllis, and she was impressed, but somehow is not getting into it. But she gives me the space to do whatever I do.
Are there any other questions? Esther?
Oh, my sister and I visited your mother, I think it was in 1981, and there was a younger man living with her. I think that was Aaron. And I saw his name mentioned in a list of people who were in Cannes with Baba. Is he a Baba member?
Yes. I don't know whether Arendt was in Zurich, okay, at the time when Baba was there, but I know he came to live with my mother after World War II, maybe, and 10 years after, something like that, and he stayed the rest of his life. And he died about a year later on, after my mother died. He just never could get his act back together and alone.
You know, there were many of the Baba lovers from those days, Gene Adriel, Quentin Todd, Herbert Davy. They seemed to drift away from Baba at one time or another in their lives. Did your mother go through that at all, or did her faith in Baba remain steady throughout?
I know that her faith in Baba always was very strong, and just sometimes she seemed to put more energy into it than other times, but the fundamental thing was always there, and she was always very involved. She always was talking to me about Baba and love, and I asked her, what is love? And she could never give me an explanation of any kind that was acceptable to me, or that I could understand. Pardon me.
I didn't quite get that. You say what she explained about love was acceptable.
No, I just could not understand it. It had nothing to do with it being acceptable or not. I just could not understand what she meant. She said, you know. I said, no, I don't. Tell me. And that's, when we needed a bridge.
Well, it wasn't a violin lesson, that's for sure.
No, that's...
I just was wondering, have said so many things about the changes in the world. Have you all seen those come about? He said, I will bring together the East and West. I will bring together all religions. Have you not seen that happen? I mean, it's very evident that he is bringing together the East and the West so much more than he in the 30s, for example, and
Yes,
our multi-ethnic population and all, with all the religions manifesting and right there.
Eastern philosophies and religions have really, what shall I say, become popular in the last 20 years here. And things are accepted now. 20 years ago, you were an outsider, and if they let you do what you do, or that's as good as it got to be. Anyway, in my life, my experience of life in the United States.
Yes.
Fred.
With your contact with Baba, it's probably very special to you in regards to a past life with an avatar. Do you have any intuitive like feelings of contact in the past with anyone? I mean, or past lives, do you have any kind of feelings of past life?
No, a psychic, however, told me at one time that I have a very beautiful teacher. She came right out and told me to stay with my teacher. These were her words. And she also said that I was around in medieval time, and I was a very unnice person. And it appears to her that I have come in this lifetime to clean up all the karma that I had gathered for my last time around. There is one story that I remember that my mother told me long time after it really happened. It was at the time when Baba was in Zurich. She was with him, and he asked her, "Which of your children do you love most?" And my mother has always made a conscious effort not to prefer any child to another, and if she did, for sure not to show it. And she told me that was the hardest thing that ever happened, that she had to face or look at and do some soul searching about. And she told Baba that it's Toby. And Toby, she said, you just at the time were in a beautiful stage of growing up. You were all, clean and or innocent. And, this is what came out. And Baba said, he is my son. To her.
He is my son, meaning Toby.
Oh.
One last question. You know the story that we often have heard, perhaps, about Carl Jung and his relationship to the Mertens. What was that relationship?
I don't know at what time that happened, but my father went through psychoanalysis with Jung.
Yes. And he invited Jung to meet Baba.
Yeah, and I remember several occasions where they expressed their displeasure that he did not show up and he missed a chance of his lifetime, and whatever.
Fred, then Esther.
Switzerland, and some areas of Switzerland that Baba visited, I guess, have legendary backgrounds of being some special places for spiritual type of maybe environment or atmosphere. Can you recall or elucidate on that?
I do not really know. I went to school across the valley from Fallen Flu, where Baba met met the other spirits, and I have been over there not knowing that at the time, and it was just a mountain for me. I mean, I was there and in Fallen Flu and walked up those mountains, and I didn't feel any spirits, but then this is neither here nor there.
Mm-hmm. Esther.
What was more on Jung? My sister asked your mother what Baba thought about Jungian psychology, and your mother said that Baba said that it's better to leave things in the unconscious rather than trying to pull everything out of the unconscious. Do you know anything about that?
No, I just always say, if it's psychological, don't worry about it, it can be fixed. If you break your leg, that's something else. That's what you got to worry about.
Well, on that note, Toby, thank you very much for having
Absolutely.
come all the way up here from San Clemente. And,
Welcome.